She's a leader in the LGBT community, she's a leader for journalism, and she is a leader for Chicago. Please say hello to Tracy Baim.
I was 21 years old in 1984 when I started work as an entry-level journalist at GayLife newspaper. I had been told in journalism school that I could not be an open lesbian and a journalist at a mainstream media company, and that was pretty true. There were just a handful of openly gay journalists working in the non-gay press in 1984. Those at the Chicago Tribune and other local mainstream outlets were deeply closeted. I know because my stepdad worked at the Tribune, my mother worked at the Defender, and all their gay friends were closeted, except when they came to our house. GayLife was run by Chuck Renslow. Chuck had founded International Mr. Leather and ran dozens of businesses over the course of his life, starting with the country's first gay leather bar in the 1950s. The GayLife offices were wedged between his Man's Country bathhouse and the Chicago Eagle Leather Bar, which he had sold. The same crew cleaned the GayLife offices and Man's Country, so once a week, the smells of hardcore chemical cleaners permeated our offices. It was horrible and nauseating. In the summer of 1984, being a gay press reporter meant covering the incredible challenges facing a community under siege from multiple fronts, from viruses and internalized homophobia to serial killers and anti-gay politicians and judges. In fact, sometimes it was several of those factors at once, as was the case with Larry Eyler. Eyler was gay and a serial killer. Famous Chicago journalist John Conroy wrote about Eyler in 1992 for the Chicago Reader, looking back at a troubled life, the death and destruction he caused, and the way he targeted the ones society wouldn't miss. But 16-year-old Danny Bridges was noticed, mainly because there were photos of him from TV interviews he had done about the sexual abuse of children. So when Bridges' body parts were found in garbage cans in a Rogers Park alley on August 21st, 1984, the media paid attention. Journalist Geraldine Kollerick wrote the book Freed to Kill about Eyler and his victims. And even though Eyler was convicted of Bridges' murder and is sentenced to death, there was a lot of unknown about him. Eyler's attorney, Kathleen Zellner, felt police were hiding information, including that Danny Bridges may have been set up by police to entrap Eyler. Eyler was already known to Chicago police, and Zellner wondered if Bridges was among other child prostitutes used to entrap pedophiles. Zellner even suggested that the files on Danny Bridges went missing, and they did go missing, because of a direct link between Bridges and her client, namely that the boy had been recruited by cops. How did Eyler operate so freely in Chicago after he was known to kill? Mainly because he had always targeted people that society found disposable. This is so similar to today, when transgender women of color are murdered and the crimes are rarely solved, including in Chicago. On September 30th, 1983, Indiana State Police connected Eyler to the murder of Ralph Calise, whose body had been found 4 weeks earlier in Lake Forest, Illinois. But Lake County Circuit Judge William Brock ruled that Eyler had been illegally detained and he was out on the streets. At that point, he was a suspect in 23 murders living in Rogers Park. Yet somehow police were not watching, they say. Danny was likely his 24th victim. Eyler himself died of AIDS on March 6, 1994 in prison. His attorney was authorized to issue a posthumous confession. Eyler admitted to killing 21 men and boys between 1982 and 84 in the Midwest, but he insisted he did not kill Bridges, even if he was involved in the cover-up. He said his accomplice, Robert David Little, a professor in Indiana, had committed the murder. This was always a complicated case, but the bottom line was that Danny Bridges was yet another young victim, and Eyler was yet another serial killer using murder as a way to confront his own demons. Eyler wasn't the first or last gay serial killer, and Bridges wasn't the last victim. For me, covering crimes like this meant making sure the victims or survivors were not just another number on a serial killer's rap sheet. Whether it was Eyler or later killers I also covered, including Jeffrey Dahmer, who picked some of his victims up in Chicago gay bars. In 1991, I went to Milwaukee, where he had committed his crimes, to attend a vigil for the victims of Dahmer. It was a powerful reminder of how many people are impacted when one person dies. Dahmer died in jail just a few months after Eyler, after having murdered 17 young men and boys. The other Danny I wanted to talk about is someone I knew personally, Danny Sotomayor. Danny was not an activist until he was forced to be one when confronted by HIV and AIDS and the mortality of himself and his partners, first Ralph Hosmer and later playwright Scott McPherson. Danny was a charismatic young man and a brilliant artist. He was a powerful part of ACT UP, the AIDS coalition to unleash power. Wow, I didn't think I was going to get emotional. I'm writing about not getting emotional, and I'm going to get emotional. In fighting back against AIDS, ignorance, and bigotry, ACT UP's success was in large way attributable to the graphic designers and artists who created educational and iconic imagery such as the silence equals death buttons. Danny produced numerous posters and editorial cartoons that hammered home the crisis and took on big game: President Reagan, Senator Helms, and Mayor Richard Daley, M. Daley. He even took on fellow gays who he felt weren't doing enough or who were apologists. He was called the angriest queer for a reason. Many other queers dismissed, and disdained him. He'd been fired from other gay media by the time he started working for me, and I was the last local publisher to run his biting cartoons. Covering and working with Danny was like being in the eye of a storm. The edges could close in at any time. His life was on the line, and as with so many other young men I was covering, he was not much older than I was. He was new to activism, but took to it quickly and with a singular focus. He just didn't care who he pissed off. For me, a war zone mentality was in place. Get these guys' stories down before they died. And it was mostly guys then. There were also women, though, including transgender women. There were people of all colors impacted by HIV and AIDS, and the gay press of the 1980s were the main ones covering their full stories. Sometimes mainstream media got it right, but mostly they got it wrong, or ignored it, or were spreading bad information. When I took a photo of some of these individuals, we both knew it would be their last. And in some cases, they would say, "Use that photo for my obituary, Tracy." It was matter of fact and true. I never saw it as maudlin, and I never broke down crying until 35 years later. I saw it as my job to tell their stories, to show their faces, and just tell the truth. In 1990 interview with the Chicago Reader, Danny said, "All the guys I've known who have died, sometimes I can see and hear them when I'm hurting, or when I'm concerned about somebody who's sick. I try to recall them for guidance. When you're covering death so closely, you can't help but become close to the people." Danny was a friend, in the sense that we hugged when we saw each other, and I visited him in his final days in Illinois Masonic. He was frail and bald and thin. He had long since quit ACT UP because of the differences in strategy and tactics. His passion was buried behind an oxygen mask, his eyes speaking volumes about his fear and his inability to continue on. Danny was just 33 years old when he died in 1992. Hundreds of people attended his funeral at the Riviera Theater, and Mayor Daley tried to act like he cared. But Danny's friends never let Daley forget how much Danny loathed him and fought hard for Daley to push for increased funding. I learned a lot from Danny, especially not to care if more traditional activists or leaders tried to tell me what couldn't be done. I've channeled Danny a lot over the years, including through my volunteer work with the Gay Games and organizing the March on Springfield for Marriage Equality and the youth homeless efforts I've been part of. So many people have told me not to, that those things would fail, but I learned to believe in my community through people like Danny, who were fearless in the face of the worst imaginable news. Journalists have a unique lens in covering communities. For me, I've always felt it was an honor to cover people at their best and their worst, as they fought for their lives and the community. I'm not sure why, after 35 years, I have not burned out. Maybe because of my years as a reporter when I witnessed my generation and the ones before it dying off because of a disease that could have been stopped in its tracks sooner. Maybe because if I ever feel tired or upset with the infighting, I see the faces of the guys. I picture the photos I took of them in their last days of their life, and I'm committed to making sure they're not lost. It's been 35 years since I worked next door to Man's Country Bathhouse and for the legendary Chuck Renslow. After Chuck died and Man's Country was closed in late 2018, my partner and I took a tour of the parts of it I had never seen. I had once filmed a gay Christmas movie in the disco area, and Chuck had showed me some of it. And he even had a small part in the movie. But that day, we were able to see the basement catacombs, the places that were dark, the grotto, and the dank, desperate, tiny rooms where love and lust merged nightly for decades. Even as lesbians, we understood the history we were seeing. We walked through with a reverence, almost as if on a funeral march. Not just for the loss of Chuck, but also for the tens of thousands of men who would walk through those doors, who slept there when they had nowhere to go, who came to Chicago for furtive love, for a touch, a kiss, and maybe even for long-term relationships. I don't know if these two Dannys ever went to Man's Country, but I know they traveled in the footsteps of many men who did, of many men who lived, loved, and died before them. And I almost can't finish this. Being a journalist means you're on the front lines of history. You get to write that first draft. I stand in a witness for these two Dannys, And now you get to witness them, too.
I'm alone in a world I cannot fight. Desperation rips me up inside. Does anybody care if I'm alive? Do you believe I deserve to die? My struggle lives beyond the words you deny. God put me here and gave me life. I know my time is short and my name means nothing to you. Don't wanna leave this world behind. Every breath I take lives on in the name of justice. I'm running on. With illness anymore. My legacy is greater than all we endure. Brothers, sisters, keep hope in store. I know my time is short and my name means nothing to you. Don't wanna leave this world. Every breath I take lives on in the name of justice. I'm running on. I'm running out of time. Don't need forever, just a little bit longer. I know my time is short and my name means nothing to you. Don't wanna leave this world behind. Every breath I take lives on in the name of justice. I'm running out. I know my time is short and my name means nothing to you. Don't wanna leave this world. Justice, I'm running out. I'm running out of time. Thank you. Tracy Baim. What a gift. What a gift.